Okay. Hi, everybody. We are at 2 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and start. If people come in, we have a couple of seats up in the front that they'll be super excited to come sit up in the front right as we start. A couple of notes before we begin. I know that there's not enough handouts on the table for everybody, but on the white handout, there's a QR code. At the end of my presentation, there's a QR code to access all of the resources that are on the table. I'm going to load the presentation in there. There's going to be even more stuff on the Google Drive folder, including all the curriculum that I'm going to be talking about. So don't feel like you have to hoard all the stuff that's on the tables. We can be sharing people. And you'll have access electronically to all of it. If you can't get the QR code to work out, whatever that is, my mom's here, she probably can't get the QR code to work out. That's okay. You can email me. I've got my email here on this screen, so just say, hey, I'd love to get those resources, and you can do it that way as well. Okay, we might want to shut the door. Is that distracting to anyone else, or is it just me? Okay. Okay, thanks for being here. My name is Jenna Campbell. I serve as the Director of Children and Youth Ministry in Stillwater, Oklahoma, at First Presbyterian Church. And you can see my church there. First, really what I want to say is, yes, I'm a Director of Children and Youth Ministry, but I'm also a mom. You can see a picture of my girls there, or you can just see them in the back of the room over here. I want you to wave. I thought it'd be more fun if they were just here in person. And actually, my husband's not even pictured here, but he's here somewhere, but he just stepped out. He knew I was going to call on him. And my parents are here, too, if they want to wave. It's kind of a family affair today. I don't normally bring my family to every workshop I lead, but it turns out that it happened this time. I wanted to give you all a little bit of the context that I serve within, because anytime we talk about things that a church is doing, I think it's important that we have the context, because we tend to compare ourselves with one another a lot, and we think that we need to do all the things that another church is doing without recognizing kind of where our own church is at and if it would work or not, right? So I serve about a 500-member church in a university town. There's a population of about 50,000 people. For our staff, we have two pastors. I'm the Director of Children and Youth Ministry full-time. We have 2 youth ministry assistants that are college students that work 10 hours a week with our youth, and then we have a 5-hour-a-week children's ministry assistant. So that's kind of some of the staff that's working with this. And kind of just some of our attendance stuff. And attendance, we know, is really weird after COVID, right? So we've started not doing kind of an average of regular weekly attendance, but just saying in the span of a month, here's our goal for what we want to see. And so that's kind of how we're setting our goals for attendance. And so in the span of a month, we see between the ages of 5 and under 15 in some way. That's in worship or in Sunday school, in the little pre-K class. In some form, we see them in some way or another that way. In 1st through 5th grade, we have about 17 that we see at some point throughout the month. And in 6th through 12th grade, we have about 16. So that just kind of gives you a place, kind of place it within a context. We are actually one of the hybrid workshops. So if you guys want to turn around and wave to those cameras up there, everyone can wave. There's also a camera up here. So I want to welcome our online attenders, and grateful for all of those who are gathered in the room as well as online. And for the online attenders, we have Sarah that's over here as our moderator. We're glad you're here, Sarah. And Sarah's going to be moderating so that if any of our online attenders have any questions or comments to make, she's going to stop me and interrupt me and let us know what we can be answering for them. And I think we have the ability for them to actually unmute and speak at some point if they want to do that. Do we have that?
Yes.
But it would be better for her to do that. Is that what you're saying?
It would be great if that were just, let's ask people on Zoom.
Okay. We'll work it out. We'll work that out. But I would say if anyone in person has a question or a comment, we have a mic up here that we'll pass around so we can make sure to be welcoming and that those online can hear us. All right, and if you have questions along the way, there's gonna be a lot of talking. I'm so sorry. This is educational, and that's the worst. So I'm just gonna acknowledge that up front. But we're gonna have a lot to fit in here. There'll be some videos, and you have all the brochures and stuff on the table. But please feel free to interrupt me as we're going on if it makes no sense at all, and you have wonderings about some other stuff. Okay, so this workshop is going to guide us on maybe a way to weave a Matthew 25 emphasis throughout children's and youth ministry. And the point of this is really about going beyond service projects. It's not like we just decided to do a whole lot of service projects one year. We really focused a lot in a deeper way on the least of these and how our faith calls and moves us to respond. So not just learning about that, although that was a huge part of it, but then how do we faithfully respond to what we're learning about regarding the least of these? If anyone's forgotten what Matthew 25 is, I've put it up here on the screen, kind of the basics of it. We've got the sheep and the goats, right? And they were on the left and the right, and they said, you know, when did we see you hungry and give you food? And when did we see you thirsty and give you a drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, naked and clothe you, sick and care for you, and in prison and visit you? And Jesus replied, truly, I tell you, just as you did it to the least of these, you did it unto me. And so we spent a whole lot of time really digging into this verse about what that means and what Jesus' message was through it. So our Matthew 25 study was about this verse, but it was also about the Matthew 25 initiative in the Presbyterian Church USA. Many of you here might be Matthew 25 churches. That's a thing. If you don't know about it, you can be a Matthew 25 church in the APCE USA, and it's based on these three aspects. A Matthew 25 church can either choose one of these pieces here to focus on, or kind of choose to focus on all three. So it's about building congregational vitality, kind of asking that question, if our church wasn't here, would it make a difference? How would our community know? What are we doing in our community? Dismantling structural racism is another emphasis, and eradicating systemic poverty. And so the Matthew 25 initiative for us, man, has made a huge difference. I would say because it's given us an identity. Not because our church wasn't about these things before, but it's given us a common language and common conversations to have around these topics. And I've heard of a lot of churches that say, well, we kind of already do all that anyways. We don't really need to be a Matthew 25 church. But in our instance, it's really been a lot of identity that we can, when we say as a church, we're a Matthew 25 church, we know what that means. And it's kind of common language that our whole congregation can use. Okay, before I go into some of the specifics of what our congregation has done, I wanted to kind of give you a timeline only to ease yourselves a little bit, to say we didn't do all of this in the span of 3 months, right? So don't try to do all of this in 3 months. It's going to be awful. So spread it out a little bit. June of 2020, does anyone remember June of 2020? You're probably in your pajamas at your house. So we were, man, the very beginning of the pandemic, and everyone was thinking, what are we going to do, and how are we going to connect people? You might also remember that the George Floyd protests were a big part of what was happening in June of 2020. And so we were thinking as a congregation, what can we do that will give us focus and connection in a way that matters around this time, as we're all grappling with George Floyd and the protests and racism in our communities. And so we voted that month to become a Matthew 25 congregation. That was also the time we have a resourcing website for families in our congregation called APCE, faithfulfamilies.com, that you can go to and find. We posted anti-racism resources for families. There's a whole lot more on that website if you want to check that out as well, but that was a part of it that we uplifted for our families. In July of 2020, we invited our congregation to be part of a 21-day race equity challenge. Many of y'all might have heard of this. It was originally developed by Eddie Moore Jr. We actually are grateful for Myers Park Pres in Charlotte. They have amazing resources for this, and they so graciously share them for free. But there's a list of what to read and listen to, watch, notice, and engage. For 21 days as a congregation, we offered it to the whole church. We had several youth that took part. People could just do it on their own individually and commit to do that, or we also offered the opportunity for small groups to gather and discuss weekly on the things that they were learning and kind of debriefing together. And out of that experience, we had an anti-racism group that was formed and met monthly for 2 years. I think just this past fall, they stopped meeting monthly and are kind of going to look at more seasonal type things that they're doing. Okay, then we had a Raising White Kids book group with our parents of children and youth that met to read that book and really grapple with how we can faithfully raise white kids in our community today, and giving ourselves tools to have conversations that need to be had with our own children in our communities. So that was a good book group study. And then fall of 2020 to spring of 2021, we had a Journey of Justice study with our youth group, and I'm going to go into more detail about what that looked like. But it was about 8 months of studying mission and poverty and race together with our 6th through 12th graders. The fall of 2021, we had our Pay It Forward challenge that you all are going to hear more about, and our Matthew 25 Seeing Jesus theme for children's and youth ministry. This past summer, we have, obviously I'm in Stillwater, Oklahoma, which is about an hour away from Tulsa. Many of you all might know, and I hope you do know, about the Tulsa Race Massacre. There's a lot of people in Oklahoma even that don't know about that or recently are finding out about it. And so we visited the Greenwood Rising Black Wall Street History Center and toured that building and have continued conversations about the resources in Tulsa that we can keep learning about our own local history and context around racism. We also did our Following Jesus Faith Practices youth study. That's what we're really in the midst of right now that I'm not going to talk about today. But I kind of wish if I'd done this backwards, so make a note of this if you're getting ready to start doing something like this. Right now, we're doing Following Jesus. What does it mean to follow Jesus? And that faith practices move us to follow Jesus. It's how we follow Jesus, right? So things like engaging scripture, acts of justice and mercy, Sabbath keeping, all of those kinds of faith practices are not just to check off a box and say, I'm a good Christian because I read my Bible today. But they move us, as our CRCNA, if you've ever seen their faith practices resources, they move us. Faith practices move us to love God and neighbor, to listen for the Spirit, and to be more like Jesus. And so we've been talking a lot this year that it's not just that we go out and do good things because we're good people, although, I mean, we want to be good people, but our practice of faith moves us to respond that way. So I almost wish we would have started with those faith practices and grounded ourselves in those faith practices and then moved on to this Matthew 25 work as it undergirds and gives a foundation for that work. But alas, we didn't, and so we're doing it now, and that's okay. Actually, before we go into that, I'm going to talk about some more of the resources that we used and the activities that we did to explore Matthew 25. On your handout, on the white handout, it kind of divides it by children, youth, and intergenerational. But I'm kind of just going to talk about all the things, so it's not going to exactly follow your handout. There's also a blue handout on your table that has a summary of the children's and youth lessons for the Seeing Jesus study. So that just kind of gives you an idea, just a quick summary of that. And then on the yellow paper, there's a resource list for Matthew 25 resources. There's a whole lot more I could have put on there. I just included just some of the things that were helpful to us and that we used in our study together. So it's just a very beginning point. If you access those on the Google Drive, those are active links that you can go straight to those resources. I also want to note, when we started this a couple years ago, there wasn't really a whole lot out there in Matthew 25 for children and youth, hence why I just wrote my own, and thankfully now there's a whole lot more out there, so you can access a whole lot more stuff now. But I did use a couple of resources that are on there that I'll reference in a little bit. Okay, our first year-long study this was with our 6th through 12th graders, was using Youth Mission Co.'s curriculum Journey of Justice. Excellent curriculum. If anyone else has used it or is aware of Youth Mission Co., they've got other curriculum out there as well. Really good stuff for youth and young adults and adults as well. The year-long study focused on mission, poverty, and race. So for mission, we talked a lot about the difference between colonial and post-colonial missions. So our youth can have a conversation about the differences between them and what that looks like. We had a mission coworker that visited this fall, and she was really surprised as we started talking about colonial versus post-colonial mission. She was like, okay, we can have this conversation. Talked a lot about the difference between charity and justice. For poverty, we really spent a lot of time defining poverty, talking about the structural aspects of poverty and generational poverty and where that comes from and how that continues to affect that cycle. And then with race, we talked about race as a social construct and kind of introduced that kind of language and what that means. We talked about privilege and implicit bias, the history of racism in our structures. We learned about redlining, looked at our own town, and saw how redlining affected our own community. So for all of that, at the very end, the curriculum Journey of Justice led us to evaluate and then recommend our congregation based on what our congregation is doing in forms of social justice and mission work, kind of evaluating what we're doing, and then recommendations based on our study. So we had an opportunity to give those recommendations to session to say, here's what we're doing, here's maybe some more faithful ways to engage in mission work in our communities and around the world based on what we've studied this year, which was a great way to empower the youth to say, you've done some great stuff this year, what do we need to be learning from what you have, and give that to our congregation too. We also had a conversation with our anti-racism group when they learned that our youth had been studying about race. They said, gosh, we just want to meet with them and hear what they have to say. We want to hear about the experience in the schools. We want to hear what they're coming up against, what they're learning in youth group. And so it was a great opportunity to get our adults involved with our youth and hearing the youth's perspective on race in our community and their experience with that. I do want to add, that curriculum is pricey. I'm just going to say that as a point of privilege. It's pricey. It's probably like $1,000. Okay? Yeah. So I'm just going to name that. And the privilege that our congregation had to use endowment funds to purchase it. In addition to the curriculum that you get, you have a facilitator with Youth Mission Co. that meets with you every month, that looks at the lesson with you, that adapts it for your own context, that works through. So you have monthly engagement with their staff. And bless them, we did this weekly because we didn't do a 12-month program. We did it every week. And so we said, hey, can we have a call every week? They're like, sure. So we met with them weekly. So there is a whole lot of adaptation and personal relationship involved with that. It's not just a, here's your book and go for it. But I do want to mention that it's a lot. And it took extra endowment money for us to be able to do that. Yes.
Did you do this during the Sunday school hour?
Thank you for asking that. The question was if we did it during the Sunday school hour. We did it during youth group, which for us is on Sunday evenings. Yeah. Okay. Anything else about the Journey of Justice year?
As far as the curriculum, do you think you spend a lot of money? Do you think, well, I don't want to, was it worth it as far as?
So would we do it again? Was it worth it?
Mm-hmm.
I would do it again. I would do it again. It was a lot of money. We wouldn't be able to spend that every year. But I truly feel like spending that year, building that foundation, having those conversations allowed us to do what came next, which is what I'm about to talk about. So it was worth it. It really was. It allowed us to tackle some really difficult topics in some ways that were handled very well because it was really good curriculum leading us through that.
How long was it?
I think it's 12 lessons. There's yes, 12 lessons. Yeah. Okay.
One more question.
Could it be an intergenerational thing, or is it a youth curriculum?
It is written as a youth curriculum. I think it could be youth and adults.
Sure.
I don't think it could be children unless it was very much adapted. Yeah. Yeah, I do think it would have been great to have some adults in there doing that with them. Okay. Anything? Sarah, I feel like you want to say something.
No, I was just thinking, I think we got half for something, and then, just in my experience, like we used part of it because that's the budget money I had.
Yeah.
So we didn't do the whole 12, but we just bought, I'm just trying to think, I think we bought maybe 6 lessons or something to try it out.
Okay, so Sarah's saying you can maybe buy part of the lessons and not the whole thing. They also have some other curriculum, like I mentioned, that's not $1,000. So it might just be a good place to start and just kind of, and have a call to Youth Mission Co. They're really great about just hopping on a call and talking about what your needs might be and what might work for your group. Okay, the next year, the fall of 2021 to the spring of 2022, our theme for the year was Seeing Jesus. And we spent that year asking the question, why, a lot. Our youth probably hated how many times we asked, but why? Right? So why are people hungry? Not just that there are people hungry or there are people thirsty, but why are people hungry? Why are people thirsty? Why do these conditions exist in our society? This is actually the bulletin cover that one of our youth created for our Youth Sunday for the year that we did our Seeing Jesus study. And if you can't read the title, it's Seeing Jesus, and then Cornell West's Justice is What Love Looks Like in Public, quote. But I just love what she came up with to depict that. So for our Seeing Jesus study in children's ministry, we focused on seeing Jesus in Matthew 25 during Sunday school. So for that hour long with our 1st through 5th graders, we still use a workshop rotation model curriculum, or model for that, which I know a lot of people don't use anymore. But I'll tell you what, it is working like a charm at our church, and it always has. So we're not fixing what's not broke. And it's really wonderful. So you'll notice when you see the curriculum in the Google folder that some of them have multiple lessons because it's workshop rotation. So you might see one based on science, you might see one on art. You know, we have some cooking lessons that are with it. We have digital technology and media, storytelling, creative drama, all of those things. That's because we use workshop rotation. So that's kind of why you'll see that working that way. And then in youth ministry, we spent the school year studying in youth group on Sunday evenings, and that was for our 6th through 12th graders. And so all along the way, the Seeing Jesus study included a lot of study, both of the Bible, obviously. So a lot of it wasn't just Matthew 25, but we incorporated a lot of scripture into each of the lessons, as well as the study of different topics. So hunger, we studied hunger and poverty. We studied refugees. We'll kind of look at some of those specifics with that. Lots of hands-on and interactive activities, and also opportunities for service. Yes? So it's just the workshop rotation model. That's just the style of Sunday school that we use. It's not a curriculum. So workshop rotation model is just a way of dividing up how we teach Sunday school. So we have different teachers in different rooms that are open with an emphasis on looking at the story with a certain perspective of how people learn as far as art or music or technology or storytelling, that sort of thing. So the curriculum is just stuff that I put together, so it's not an actual program that's out there. But I'm happy to share it with you all. So you're gonna get that there. Also, just know, this is my Enneagram 1 coming out. Like, I just wrote this because it wasn't out there, and I just wrote it for our teachers. So I didn't, like, make it all lovely and beautiful for you all. It's just kind of there. The one in me wants to be like, oh, I want to make this perfect and wonderful if I'm going to share it with everyone, but I didn't. So give me some grace on that, okay? I just thought I'm going to give you it, and you can make it what you want it to be for your group, okay? The resources, obviously I didn't just come up out of a blank page and do this, but I was inspired and adapted some things. Phyllis Voss Wiesman's Seeing Jesus curriculum on social justice activities for today based on Matthew 25, that's more children's focused. Lisa Van Ingen's and Social Justice for All is a great book. Oh my gosh, it's so wonderful. It starts each chapter with some just looking at the particular topic, and then looks by age how you might address it with different resources and questions. So that always, looking through those kind of helps spur me on to the next thing on how we would want to use it. And those links are on your yellow form as well. Also, Phyllis came out with a book, man, right after we finished the study. I should have gotten with her on timing here, but she came out with another one on Matthew 25 called Through the Lens, which also has more Matthew 25 activities for children. And that was Through the Lens is that one. All right, we're going to hop into some specifics about this. The first thing that we did with our youth to open this study on Matthew 25 was to play Justice Monopoly with them. If you just Google Justice Monopoly, you can find lots of different versions. What we did was we kind of said, I like this part about this version, and that part about that version, and this part about this version. We kind of made our own. So on the green paper, on your tables, again, this is all in the Google Drive, so no hoarding. You'll have access to this, but they had certain rules for Monopoly. So whatever people started with for money was their inheritance. So they had cards that they chose for what class they were representing as they played. And if you were in a certain class, like the paper says, if you have an upper class card, you start the game with 2,500. If you have a lower class card, you start the game with 500. And we talked about the idea of generational wealth, right? That just we haven't even started the game yet, right? And people are already ahead. So the order of play, upper class gets to start. Salaries are different, so every time you pass go, it's not just $200. Some people get $250, some only get $100. Purchasing properties has a rule too, as we learned about redlining and all of that, right? That's reflected in the game. There is income tax. There's different rules for jail on what happens on the back between what happens for those who are in the upper class and what happens for those in the lower class. The upper class is the bank. If it's against the rules to complain about the rules, y'all, okay? So you can't complain about the rules, and if you do, you go to jail. And if there's any unclear rules, they will be clarified by the upper class. So I wonder who that might benefit. Yeah. So we started the first part of our study just playing this game, and it was really interesting to see the emotions that came out in our youth, and to see some of the generosity that came out. And some people said, well, and people who weren't generous at the end as we debriefed said, well, I was just playing by the rules. The rules said to do this. And so we talked about, how are we just doing that in society? We're just playing by the rules, right? The conversation was really wonderful about kind of looking at the parallels between society and this, and how these types of things undergird the study that we were about to undergo in Matthew 25. What rules are set up for this to take place? What structures and systems are there that cause these things to happen? Okay, so we broke up our study by basically taking each of the 6 parts of Matthew 25, the hungry, thirsty, stranger, sick, all of that, and looking more in depth at that. So for I was hungry, we really were thinking about who's hungry in our community, what obstacles do they encounter, whether it's access to food or affordability or food deserts, lack of job or transportation. What are things that help those who are experiencing hunger? So for our children, we looked at some of those things. We read the book Stone Soup, which is a great classic, and we made stone soup together, and we talked about each of us giving what we have, and then those meals, the soup was given and used for our compassionate meals in our church, and the meals were given out to different families. We had just opened, literally, I think, the week before, a little free pantry on our church grounds for the community, and so an opportunity to stock that and invite children to bring food for that, and an opportunity to share with them about why that was needed, and how their family could be a part of stocking that each week. We also played in our digital technology room, played freerice.com. If you've ever been there, freerice.com is part of the UN World Food Program. And anytime you play freerice.com, you you give, for each question, you give a grain of rice to the UN World Food Program, and you can see how the grains of rice add up for that, and they have sponsors that make that possible. So they got to learn a little bit about the UN Food Program. We also played a Chutes and Ladders game using some of Phyllis Wiesman's Bible stories around food and contemporary situations around food. And so we talked about, you know, Chutes and Ladders, the classic game. When you go up the ladder, what are some of those things that help people kind of get up the ladder? And what are some of those things that are in our society that they are sliding back down? And how can we prevent that from happening? Our youth looked at the root causes of hunger. They heard stories of those experiencing hunger. There's a resource that was put out quite a bit ago, but has been recently revised by the APCE USA. It's on your yellow sheet. It's the Just Eating, Practicing Our Faith at the Table resource. There's a hunger section of that that's really good, that has some of those stories of those experiencing hunger that were really impactful for our youth. And then kind of an intergenerational thing, we have like most communities do, a food and resource center in our community called Our Daily Bread. And we serve regularly there as a congregation. And the opportunity to shop with the guests that are at Our Daily Bread and have interaction with them as we shop with them. So that's hungry. I was thirsty. We talked about pollution and access to clean water, the stewardship of God's gift of water. You can see in the bottom right an Enviroscape demonstration. You can contact your local water resources organization for that. My dad probably could tell you who in your state, he works with water resources, has this demonstration, but it's a really great interactive demonstration. I put a link to a video on the Google Drive folder of just a video of it, so if you can't access it in your region, you could show the video, but it shows like how pollution in one area feeds into the river over here, and it's just a really great interactive way to look at our water systems. And then we also have a member who spoke to our youth group. He works for water justice issues around the world. And so it's great to have him come in and talk about the things that they have run up against and the things that they see that are working as far as water justice issues. For I Was a Stranger, the timing of this was just really interesting. That same month that we were on this, or I guess the next month on this theme, you'll remember in August of 2021 what was going on with Afghanistan, and we were receiving a lot of refugees in our country. Oklahoma received quite a few refugees. I think we were the third. We had the third most in the state, or in the country, for our state. And so our town was getting ready to receive 40 Afghan families. And so we used this opportunity to educate our children and youth on how to best welcome. When we think about welcoming the stranger in Matthew 25, what that might look like. So we educated ourselves on their culture. We used some of the resources that our community groups were using as we tried to make sure that we understood who they were and their customs and things that we needed to know to welcome them appropriately. We also use, I don't know if y'all are aware of the Stepping Stones book, but it's a beautiful book. It's a refugee family's story, and it's actually illustrated by a Syrian artist who does artist with rocks. And so all of the pictures in this book are made from rocks, and it details a family's story who's a refugee family and their story of leaving with rocks, and it's just really powerful. And so that day in the art workshop rotation room, they created their own rocks. They painted their own welcome rocks that they then placed around the community that people could find with encouraging and kind and welcoming phrases on them. So that's what some of our children did. We also read the book 4 Feet, 2 Sandals, and it's about 2 girls who are in a refugee camp. And there's a video of that book online, which we ended up watching. That's also on there. Thank you. The other thing we did, and this, I think, well, a link to this is on the Google Drive, but also in your purple Seeing Jesus handout. There's a refugee simulation that the BBC has online. It's free. And it's basically, you know, the Choose Your Own Adventure books. it's kind of like that. So we just divided up into groups. You can see in that far right picture there. We divided up into groups, and they went through that. So you're faced with a family that has to make a decision in Syria about if they're going to leave or not, or how they're going to leave and which route they're going to take. And they choose which way they're going to go, and then they're faced with other things that happen to them. And you follow their journey through and see if they make it, and the choices that they have to encounter along the way. And that caused a lot of conversation in our debriefing of that experience about just not, better understanding, not even close to understanding all the way, but just a better understanding of what families go through and what they're leaving behind, and the really horrible, awful decisions that they have to make. Just a glimpse into that experience. Okay, I was naked. We talked a lot about what is poverty. We learned about the least coin offering that the Presbyterian women are involved in, and how little bits combined together make a lot, and how we can combine our things. They had a chance to view kiva.org, a micro-lending organization, and so our kids got to go through that website together and choose a couple of small businesses to support and learn about micro-lending, and how all of us from all over the world can come together and support different small businesses, and then get updates from those small businesses that we could come back to the kids and say, okay, here's what they're doing now, and we got our money back, and we can now put it towards something else. And that was a really cool experience for them to get to be a part of. So if you're not familiar with kiva.org, that was a really neat thing to do. And just on a personal level, to get involved with kiva.org, it's a great organization. We also played Jenga with decisions that are hard to make, like childcare expenses and medication. That's written into the curriculum. That, one thing of, okay, I'm going to pay for my medication. You pull that out. I don't have that money anymore. Now I don't have that money for this, and so everything crumbles. So it's not usually, we talked about, it's not usually just one massive thing that happens. It's kind of a combination of things that those who are in poverty are experiencing that causes that hardship. And then we did the spent simulation. You might be aware of the playspent.org. Fantastic website. They basically, you are a family member and you have so much money at the beginning of the month, and you have to make it to the end of the month. And it gives you things that you have to answer, questions that you have to decide between. One is like, are you going to give money for your kid to go on the field trip? And you have to look at how much money you have and decide if you're going to do that, right? Or the medication you're going to buy, or how much food you're going to buy. And you have to see if you can make it to the end of the month. And it's all computerized. That's what they're doing there in our digital technology room, is making some of those decisions. All right, I was sick. We talked about the importance of healthcare access and what those barriers to getting healthcare might be. We read a book called Mimi's Village and how basic healthcare transformed it. That was a great book, and there's a video version of it that we used. And then we created some healthcare kits for the little free pantry as we thought about what would the needs of those be. Just, if you needed a Band-Aid, what would you do? And I'm going to invite my daughter Reese. She's 14 and took part in this. You can see her in the pictures here. They're playing, if you've ever heard the game Kerplunk, we made giant versions of it to talk about healthcare access. She's going to tell you about that.
Okay, during our Matthew 25 study, we talked about how not having access to different resources can impact someone's healthcare. We made a giant Kerplunk game to represent how this system can and does work. The sticks represented something needed to be able to access healthcare. These would include healthy food, healthcare clinics in the area, health insurance or money to pay medical bills, and even a car. Taking the sticks out would represent the lack of access. An example would be the sticks representing transportation being pulled out now represents the lack of transportation. Playing this game really helped me realize how hard it is to get the things you need if you only have access to a limited amount of resources. This activity helped me think about how healthcare access in a new way. It's important to know how limited access could possibly mean limited healthcare.
Thank you. Thank you, Reese. we had a great conversation about this, right? That it's, again, not just one of those sticks that comes out, it's the combination of all of those that makes all the balls fall, right? So a lot of, when we think about why is having access to healthcare important, we also played a similar version of this game with the Yeti and My Spaghetti game. Have you heard of that kids game? We did that version with our kids in the Sunday school during the morning and added the little spaghetti pieces as we talked about what do people need to be healthy. And when you don't have some of those things, that's a problem, right? And what can we do? That part of it's a faithful response to make sure people have what they need in terms of healthcare. Okay, I was in prison and you visited me. Our kids we had a prison ministry in a community in a Presbyterian church about half an hour away that we partnered with them in their prison ministry to learn more about it and to send cards for that. And our youth did a study on restorative versus retributive justice and what's the difference there and how do we think about that? How does our society view justice? How does the Bible view justice? And what does restorative justice mean? There is a great resource that I stumbled across for this that I didn't even realize was in Oklahoma City, which is an hour away from us. It's called Flourish OKC. And they take on a different theme every year. And the year before I was writing this curriculum, their theme was restorative justice. Praise God. And because it was during the pandemic, their stuff was all online instead of having an in-person event. So we just got to access their video that they used. And so there's a link on that yellow sheet and in the Google file to those videos on restorative justice. And they're talking about what restorative justice is, and they're highlighting organizations in the Oklahoma City area that are making an impact in terms of restorative justice and showing examples of what restorative justice looks like in our own communities. So wonderful, wonderful resource. That also brings up the fact, as I think about the pandemic, is all of this was done like during the pandemic, because that's where we were at. So the first year, our Journey of Justice curriculum, we were meeting outside in masks and bundled up in the winter. It was really interesting, but we made it work. And then last year's Seeing Jesus study was in masks until, I guess, last spring. So we had a few additional barriers and challenges, but we made it work, and we remained connected, and I think that was really important for our kids to keep doing that and to study something that made a difference, right, in the midst of that difficult time. All right. A couple of the last things that we did, we focused on advocacy. We had a conversation with our state legislator that lives in our town. We just invited her to come. She's actually a member of the Methodist Church and talked about how her faith informs how she views politics. Not telling us what we should vote, but just how does her faith inform that process for her. There's also a resource on the APCE USA website for advocacy, and that's on the yellow form that we looked at as well, about advocacy as a faith practice, and tools and tips for how we faithfully advocate and use our voices. And I will say, we did the racial wealth gap learning simulation. This is from Bread for the World at bread.org. It's completely free, y'all. Great resource if you don't know about it. We did an intergenerational event with our youth and adults. It's all about understanding the connections between racial equity and hunger, poverty, and wealth. And it highlights the structural inequity in our nation and the impact of policies, in particular, on today's hunger, income, and wealth divides, and really looks at kind of how that came to be, particularly through the policies of our country. Really fascinating, the land cards, the money as different policies are read. And if you're a white participant or a black participant, on if you get money from that policy or if you have to give money from that policy, if you lose opportunities because of that policy, if you get land because of a policy that was coming down. Really, really interesting conversations and learning about where the racial wealth gap comes from and how it continues today. And then here's the advocacy piece. So that's Trish. And then being involved in the MLK marches as a community, really getting involved with that and having a presence there. We also had our mission coworker conversation. We heard from our mission coworker from Peru this fall. Our Greenwood Rising experience, just really trying to learn more about our local context. So for you, you might not be close to Greenwood Rising. If you're close, you need to go. But there's something else in your local community that you need to learn about your local community's history. That is in Tulsa. Greenwood is the Black Wall Street district. Yeah, thank you for, I needed to clarify that. That was in Tulsa. And then each year we have a youth Sunday that culminates, it's based on whatever the theme that they studied that year was, and is an opportunity for our youth. They write every word that's spoken in the service. They plan everything. It's very powerful, and it's a way for them to inspire our congregation on what they've learned and from the scriptures and their experiences. So I think that's an important part of what they're doing. It's not just some island over here that they're having all of these conversations. We're finding ways to incorporate the rest of the congregation along the way. You can see several different points that we did that. But Youth Sunday especially, to have an opportunity to share. That is what the purple handout on your table comes from. We printed that up because we wanted our congregation to know the things that they were learning and wrestling with and talking about, because our adults need to talk about and wrestle with and discuss these same things, right? And in our congregation, I would say that our youth have been some of the people that are spurring that on in our church, that are leading that effort. So don't forget your youth can do that, and to use them that way. I'm going to show you a video from this past Youth Sunday that has our youth sharing about the Seeing Jesus study. We'll pray for the sound.
In our hearts again, increase in us we pray, unveil why we're made, come set our hearts ablaze with hope like wildfire.
My favorite discussion was the I was sick discussion, because we learned that having one problem can lead to many others, causing people homelessness and money problems.
What I learned about Jesus is that he's giving to all people.
I saw just how present these things are just under the surface of every community.
The different challenges that people face in this world, and to not be afraid to ask people what they need or to ask them their stories.
When the others hurt, we hurt. We are responsible as God's people to look out for God's people.
What impacted me most from the Seeing Jesus study was the refugee simulations. I had no idea what kinds of choices they had to make.
I learned about all the beautiful ways he shows his love and how much it really matters to trust in him.
I will remember how our systems have negatively affected people.
We have learned that we need to find the root of the problem instead of just trying to solve the problem temporarily.
I believe that I learned how Jesus is forgiving, and how we treat others is a form of how we treat him.
God is compassionate and calls us not to sacrifice material things or habits necessarily, but to sacrifice our time and resources to help those who don't have the same opportunities as us.
Jesus calls us to support the people in our community, to listen, learn, and advocate for them.
I will reach out to different people with needs.
I see God at work at Our Daily Bread. The other can be single moms, college students struggling with money, or someone in a situation where they need food assistance. Even though they're struggling, all of them are extremely grateful for what Our Daily Bread does, and I love that.
I will make sure to be more careful about my actions and think about how they will affect multiple different groups of people.
God is working in those who see the need, address and advocate, and speak out on what matters.
I feel like I see the world differently and that there are people struggling and I can help them and I can be the change.
Okay. So I hope that helps just to hear from the kids themselves on things that were impactful for them. We're going to move on to Pay It Forward Challenge, but before we do, I just wanted to see if there's any questions about kind of the study pieces that we did. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. I have a question about the refugee part, the stranger aspect. I know, like, it's not a criticism or anything, just a question. What about, like, within our local communities as far as, like, reaching out to strangers or welcoming in?
So the question for those online was what about, we focused on the refugees that were coming in, but what about in our local communities, just the strangers? And I will say for us, it was a contextual decision because we knew we were receiving these families from Afghanistan. So that's how I wrote the curriculum. So in your context, if there's another thing that sticks out as far as who needs welcome in your community, that would be something certainly to discern for your own context. In ours, there was something glaringly appropriate for us to have these conversations about, which is why we focus so much on Afghan refugees coming in, because it was literally happening to us in the next month. Yeah, they were coming to our town, and we had a huge community effort to receive them well. And we wanted our children and youth who were going to be going to school with these families, and we were all involved in the effort to receive them. We wanted them to be ready and to think about what does it really mean to faithfully welcome them. And part of that is understanding their culture, and thinking beforehand about how will we be intentionally welcoming for them. Yeah.
One more question.
Okay.
Excuse me. Okay. And then something you said earlier about, I don't want to misquote, but you said charity versus
Justice.
Justice, yes. And so, like, if there's somebody that has a sign that's, on the road or whatever, or in your community, and you're in the car with your kids, and, like, you don't want to ignore that. But how do you...
Yeah, so the difference between charity and justice, and do you ignore the needs that are obviously right in front of you? And we talked a lot about that with the kids. Like, it's not that we never made it that charity is bad and justice is good. It's that because these needs are here and now, we need both. We cannot just focus on charity, which oftentimes is kind of where the church has landed, without also addressing what has landed people in that position in the first place. So it's not either or, it's both and. Yeah. Questions online?
Okay, Betsy Nick says, I just want to say how impressed by all of these ideas. And then Grace has a question, was there resistance to these curricula at all, pushing a political agenda?
Okay, resistance. Let me just say that this whole thing, we were not talking about particular policies that were out there, okay? We were not ever talking about a political platform. We were walking down Matthew 25. Who is hungry? Who is thirsty? Who is a stranger? And we were talking about how, why should the church be talking about this was a big question that we were trying to answer, to say, there's never part of our life or this world that our faith does not inform, right? We don't have these little boxes and says, okay, our faith is going to tell us about this, but don't talk about that. That doesn't exist. Our faith is a living faith, and it should inform all of the decisions that we make and how we view the world and how we view people and how we respond to people. And that's what we were trying to teach through this study. Now, people might come up with a different way to respond to a particular need. We can have lots of conversations about that, but we can learn about what the need is and why that need exists together. I will say we did have one family leave the church because we were having this conversation. And I regret that, but I will say we've been able to maintain a really good connection. I do believe that they're in a faith community that's a good spot for them to grow, and we bless and release at that point. So I would say, obviously you need to be careful with that, but I also think we need to be bold, that Matthew 25 calls us to do this work, and everyone probably won't be happy with it, but as long as, I mean, we're talking about what is our faith, how does our faith call us to move and be in the world? And how can we most faithfully do that? That is ultimately what we're talking about with this study. Okay. Yeah.
Did any of these topics bring up personal feelings for any of the youth? I'm thinking we have youth who are in poverty and who know this all too well. Do you have youth in these situations?
Again, know your context. We did not. And so we needed, our purpose was to help our youth understand the realities that people experience in our world. And because we were coming from a place of privilege, we probably approach that differently than you probably would if you have people in your own congregation who are going through some of these experiences. So you would certainly need to be aware of your audience when you're doing this. But for you all to know that we were certainly coming from a place of privilege with kids who were not experiencing this personally. Yeah, good questions. Okay, yeah.
Intergenerational VBS at all?
Oh, well, I wasn't, but I will mention, we started, no, I probably should have said that earlier. And in the whole timeline, that probably should have been the first thing that I said. Before we started this whole study, actually, this was BC, before COVID, June of 2019, yeah, BC, we did an intergenerational VBS, used a curriculum that I wrote, Will You Be My Neighbor? And it was all focused on Mr. Rogers. And how are we good neighbors? And I really think that laid the groundwork for what was to come, even though we didn't even know it. We didn't know we were about to become a Matthew 25 church. We didn't know we were about to embark on all of this, but we spent that week in our intergenerational VBS really thinking about what does it mean to be a good neighbor and how does our faith call us to be a good neighbor. And as a part of that, we studied Matthew 25, though that wasn't the overarching scripture for it, but that I do believe laid the groundwork for that. That is not in my Google Drive. Although I think if you're interested in that, if you would email me, I would be willing to. I'm probably not going to just put it all out there, but if you're interested in that, you can email me and I can share that link with you. Yeah.
Is that like ecumenical, or can it be applied to different?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Like okay.
Absolutely. The question for online people was, is it ecumenical? Could it be in different denominational contexts? And yes. All right, I'm going to move us to Pay It Forward. So the Pay It Forward challenge, I just want to give a brief description of it. Actually, I start in the fall of 2021, but basically in 2021, early 2021, we received as a congregation a bequest from a longtime member's estate. It was a large amount of money. And so we formed a task force, which my husband got to be on, the joy of that. And as a part of that task force, I just think it was so faithful how they did this. To make the decisions, it was unrestricted money, and they decided what projects to give it to based on, they really thought about how does this help our Matthew 25 initiative. So any of the requests that committees or individuals turned in for the use of that money, they really tried to think about, how is this helping us live out our Matthew 25 identity? So about $30,000 of that $30,000 went to helping with rental assistance in our community. Because again, we're in the midst of COVID. It was a big need in our community. The Children's and Youth Ministry Program requested $5,000 to run a Pay It Forward challenge, and we got it. So in the fall of 2021, I'm going to go through all the specifics in a minute, but just a brief overview. We had 31 first through 12th graders. They each received $150 from a $5,000 estate bequest. And we had a pay it forward kickoff where they received the money and were inspired for what they could do with their money. They had about 6 weeks to complete the challenge. It was 8 weeks before we did kind of the final pay it forward celebration. So technically they had 8 weeks to finish, but we kind of asked people to do it within 6 weeks so we could gather those stories. And they were asked to use the money to make a difference in the world. That was kind of the main goal, make a difference with this money. You can see in the brochure that you have, oh, not this one, that you have here. This is actually the brochure that we made to give to the kids and their families that tell a little bit more about what it is. And I'm going to go through this in just a minute, but it included information about the challenge. And then we came back together at the end and had a Pay It Forward celebration worship service that were led by the Pay It Forward Challenge participants, and stories of impact and generosity were shared. And then we had the booklet and a video with the descriptions of the projects. And then we had 23 recipients of the money. So even though we had 31 children and youth, some of them teamed up together or were sibling pairs. So that's why the discrepancy in the number of recipients received. Okay, so I'm going to do two things at once. I'm going to lead you through how to do something like this in your own context while also describing what it looked like in our context. So asking some questions and working a process while also sharing how we did it. The first step, forming a team, then setting a goal for what we're doing and the ages that you want to figure out. We're gonna detail all of these steps in just a minute, but this is kind of the whole picture of how to do it. The first part, forming a team. Don't do this by yourself. Don't do anything in ministry by yourself, first of all, right? We know that. Form a team. Our team had a great diversity of people who had way more creative ideas than I would have ever come up with on my own. So get those people together. And if you even right now just want to stop and think of one or two names of people that you're like, oh man, they would be great at that. Or as I'm talking, write those names down, save yourself some trouble, and whenever you're going to do this, and just think of who would be great on a Pay It Forward planning team. Set the goal and the age of participants. You can see what our goal there was. And we took time as a planning team to say, before we did anything else, what is our goal with this challenge? What is our goal with this money that we've received? And it really was to empower children and youth to make a difference through impactful giving. We really wanted that empowerment piece to say, you know, we don't need to tell you what to do. You have amazing ideas now, and you can go and do that. Also think about what age it's for. We did first grade is kind of the youngest. We had some siblings below that kind of helped their older siblings, but they didn't receive, the youngers didn't receive their own $150. They helped their siblings. So we did first grade through 12th grade at FPC. Whoops. And then determine a funding source. So, I mean, $5,000 for us, we don't just have that in our operating budget. I bet y'all don't either, right? We have an endowment fund that sometimes we can pull that from, but again, that's not normally what we get. Thankfully, we got this unrestricted gift. But if I would bet that some of you have some very generous members, that if you could inspire them with this idea and kind of show them the dream of what this could be, I bet you could find some of that money if you could kind of put that seed out there on the possibilities for it. Okay, you need to determine the registration process. This was kind of a hard part of it. Like, how are we going to know who wants to do this? Because we got to figure out how to break up the money and how much we're going to give, right? There was a whole lot of details associated with this. So we had an online form that we used. We needed to know exactly how many were going to participate so that because we got cash, and that's another decision that you need to make, is if you're going to give them cash or if you're going to give them a blank check. I wouldn't recommend that. Cash really worked well for us. Having a deadline for signing up. Included on our online registration is a place where they agreed to share the story, that was part of our thing, is that they would share the story in some way. That could be they write it down, they could draw a picture of something, of the story of impact, they could make a video, they could speak at our Pay It Forward celebration. There's a whole lot of ideas on how they could share the story, but they agreed to do that as part of the registration. There was also information on the publicity release. We also had something about being thoughtful about if pictures would be appropriate. And we talked about that at our kickoff as well, to know that it's not always appropriate to take a picture, right, when you might be given the money, right? Sometimes it's perfectly appropriate, other times it's not, but to always get someone's permission and ask beforehand if you determine it would be appropriate, and then to get their permission for that as well. And then an acknowledgement of the rules. And we did online registration, we set our deadline the Wednesday before the Sunday kickoff, so we tried in this world where we all do things the last minute. We tried to get it as close to that as we could so that I could literally go to the bank on Thursday and get all the cash and divide it up into all the envelopes and that sort of thing.
Jenna,
Yes?
were all the kids within your congregation?
They were all within our congregation, yeah. The goal was not for this to be an outreach to other kids in the community as far as participants in it. Okay, determine amount and how to give the money again. For us, we just divided up that 5,000 based on how many registrants we had. I will say we kept back I think I tried to keep back 3 participants worth, so $450. Did you see that math I just did? My dad would be really proud of that. 3 participants worth, just in case someone came to the kickoff that hadn't registered and really wanted to be there. You'd really hate to be like, oh, sorry, we handed out all the money. The good news with that is we didn't have anyone show up, but we used that money at the end because we did a special thing in our Pay It Forward celebration worship that I'll tell you about. So we got to use that money just in a different way. But that would be a tip, is to keep some extra in case other people show up. You can see there how to give it. We placed it in an envelope that I made stickers of our logo that we created and just stuck it in an envelope with a sticker so it closed. We wanted it to seal because we didn't want $150 just floating around. And we also put it in a bag because a little envelope is really easy to lose. So we created these bags, and the bags had their money in it, they had the brochure in it. And our theme for our volunteers actually that year was Reflect the Light. And so we had already made these mirrors that were Reflect the Light mirrors. And so you'll see in our brochure that we talk about how are we going to reflect the light through this. So everyone got a mirror in their bag too, and we tried to put some other goodies in their bag to fill those bags up. So that's how we gave out their money. All right, so we determined the start and the end dates. For us, 6 to 8 weeks was a real sweet spot because it can't be too quick or people won't have time to figure out what they want to do and then do it. But also if it's too long, families forget and other things happen, and then it just seems to be like this thing that's weighing on you that you got to remember to do. So 6 to 8 weeks seemed to be like just a sweet spot for our families. And then the rules. We decided we would have 2 rules. One was that the money could not be given to immediate family, so no one within your household, and that 2, you had to commit to sharing the story of giving in some way. Those were really the only 2 restrictions that we had on the money. Determine kickoff programming, finding some way to be super excited about what we were asking them to do. And so if it's for children and youth, thinking about will you invite families to attend, which I would urge as a strong yes, you should do that because we want families to hear what we're telling the kids. And what ideas or inspiration would you share to get participants thinking in creative ways about how they might use their money? So for our Pay It Forward kickoff, we did it on a Sunday morning during the Sunday school hour because we can get the most kids there. So whatever that time is for you, that you can get people there. We had a speaker come. You can see Claire Grace in the top right. She is a recent high school graduate from Stillwater High School from our community, and she has started her own foundation. She is super impressive. She does a lot with anti-bullying campaigns, and so she speaks in lots of elementary schools around the state. And we brought her in to share about how she got there, like not just about her foundation, but like where did she get that idea? And she talked about her experience with her, with a sibling who was experiencing bullying, and that became a passion of hers to create a more welcoming and kind world, and that it came from that passion to then start this foundation. So we wanted them to hear, like, where do these ideas come from? It's some kind of personal experience, a personal passion that you have. And then she shared more about what that foundation looks like. She also shared about some different ideas that kids might think about, just to kind of spur their creativity, not so they could just copy all of them. And I don't think any of them used her ideas, but I do think it helped them think bigger about what they might be able to do with the story when you hear lots of different examples of ways that you could do it. Again, we had the bags that we gave out. We also had this celebratory atmosphere. We sang a lot of songs. She led us in some different fun things. We had this balloon arch that we handed out, and we called the participants forward individually to hand out their money, and we made a big deal of presenting them with their Pay It Forward bag. We took pictures of each of them under the balloon arch, and we just kind of made it a big thing, right? Okay, then you need to think about how to collect the stories. So writings, drawings, photos, videos, combination of those, providing a deadline for receiving those. I'll tell you, set your deadline several days before what your own deadline is, because you're gonna spend a lot of time getting all those in. And then think about how you might collect them. If you're just going to tell people, honestly, people just texted them into me. That was the easiest way to do it. Let's just be honest, that's how it happened. But you could also set up a Google folder that people can dump them into. You could email them to you. So find some way to collect all of those. You can see Ella here at the bottom picture. Ella, with her money, she was hit by a car several years ago. She was roller skating in the street, and she was hit by a car, and she was in really bad shape in the hospital. And for her, the program, the Comfort Dog and Gift Cart program of the Children's Hospital, meant a whole lot to her and her experience. And so she used her money to give to that gift cart program. Isn't that amazing? And she was so touched to be able to give back to that program that it meant so much to her. And so this was one of the ways that she shared her story. All right, determine how to end it and how to share those stories. So we used the brochure that's on your tables and basically wrote out some of these things are the written stuff that people turned in as their way to share the story, and those are always in quotations. And the others that didn't have it, I just kind of did a quick write-up so people would know, because this is the powerful part of this, right? Like, amazing things happened through this challenge. So we just wanted to find a way to share that as well. So think about how you're going to share those stories. For us, we did that at a Pay It Forward celebration where our kids led worship. The sermon part was children and youth sharing their stories of impact and generosity. We had a video of Pay It Forward projects, which you're going to see in just a minute. And then, remember I told you that extra cash that we had? We turned the extra cash into dollar bills, and during the time with children, our children and youth passed out $2 to every worshiper gathered there and inspired them, encouraged them to do their own mini Pay It Forward challenge program with $2. Just to say, it doesn't take a lot to make a difference, right? We had someone who had recently lost their husband and had, memorial gifts had been coming in, and it'd been several months, and she said, it wasn't until I got that $2 that I thought, I never gave to those memorials that we set up for him. And she said, I need to do that. Like, I want to do that. And it wasn't until these kids gave me this money. She said, obviously I'm going to give more than $2, but it spurred me to be more generous for that. And then we had another member who said, I've been getting these emails over and over and over about being a bell ringer for the Salvation Army at Christmas. And she said, I've been ignoring them. And she said, I I'm going to say yes, because these kids are out there making a difference, and I should too. And she said, and the $2 is going to be the first thing that I put in my pot whenever I start, and I'm going to double whatever I get when I serve. I'm going to double. And I was like, okay. So those are just two stories of the generosity that came from that $2, and it was really fun to see the kids handing out the money to everyone and doing that. Yes?
This is really comprehensive and quite amazing. I'm wondering if you have a sense of, if you saw it all in the beginning, if you had a vision for all of this in the beginning, or how did it come about?
Here's some authenticity. No. No. The question for online people is if we had a vision for all of this in the beginning. Do you mean just the Pay It Forward challenge or the whole thing? The whole thing? No. It just kind of came to be. We became a Matthew 25 congregation. We said, gosh, we need to be studying about mission and poverty and race. And that led us to want to do more on Matthew 25. And then we got this money, and wouldn't it be great if we did a Pay It Forward? And it all just kind of fed into each other. I think we were open to possibilities and looking. We were aware. We were very intentional about planning. So it wasn't just like, oh, hey, let's randomly do this. Like, there was a lot of intentionality behind it, but I won't say we ever saw, June of 22 to present and we had it all lined up. It didn't happen like that at all. Mm-hmm.
To have this all come to fruition?
Pay It Forward?
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
The Pay It Forward challenge had 4 people on the planning team, plus me. I will say, if you work through this process, it was really not a hard thing to do. I thought it would be a lot harder. I'll just say that. But if you work that process and kind of make some of those decisions, some of the logistics were hard at the beginning. But once we did it, I was like, oh yeah, okay. Just once you figure out those logistics, you'll be just fine. I'm going to share a few more things about Pay It Forward, and then we can have a couple more questions. I also wanted to share that we shared the story, right? There's some really good things happening, and we wanted to share the story of that. So we shared it on social media. Our local newspaper ran a story about one of the projects that I'll tell you about in just a minute. The Synod did a podcast with our pastor and her daughter's project. And so trying to find a way to get the word out. The next slide that I'm going to do highlights some of the stories of how they use their money. And one of them, it's going to play a video. Luke, who was in 5th grade at the time, his mom was, a few weeks in, she said, gosh, I haven't had a chance to really talk with him about what he's wanting to do. And she said, so I went to him and said, okay, Luke, what do you think? He said, oh, no, I've already started. He said, I've gone to each class in my school and I've made a presentation. He said, well, first I presented to he said, he's in the gifted and talented program. He said, I talked to my gifted and talented program and asked them to join me. And he said, and we made presentations to every class at my school. He said, I have been thinking about our custodians. He said, they do so much work for our school and they never get any recognition. And he said, so I have gone to each class in the school and we're raising money for gift cards for our custodians. And he said, we're still raising money, but they're going to do this. And he said, and then we're going to present it to them. All the classes are making cards and posters, and we're going to have a time to present them. So in the end, they ended up raising $500, and they presented. So what you're going to see in the video is them presenting to the custodians. It's just going to be a short clip of it. But the other thing is, Luke has some speech issues, and he's never exhibited any sort of leadership ever. And so to hear his mom see that in him, and her not even being a part of that and saying, the opportunity for him to step up and to do this, that empowerment part of this goal was just so there for him. He was definitely feeling empowered. So you'll see Luke here. He's in the middle.
Thank you.
This is just one of the classes.
Oh, thank you. Oh, that's so sweet.
You have to turn back around now. This way. Okay, Luke.
They had a whole plan, and then Luke explained what they had done. So that's one of the projects. We also have this red pantry on the far right. Oh, no, the left. We have three of our high school students had noticed a need in the community for menstrual products and hygiene products, and that they're expensive. And if you don't have any money, how are you going to access something that is necessary? And so within our little free pantry that had just started, they started a GoFundMe, and they raised an additional, $1,500 from the community, and started a red pantry within our little free pantry. And it is a ministry that continues today under the ministry of our deacons. It continues to be restocked every week, and it's something that continues to live on and touches our community that way. The last thing that I'll share, I guess a couple of them. The girl in the bottom in front of her school holding her envelope, she wanted to give her money to her school's book fair because she knew that there were students that weren't able to get a book. And that is so simple, but just aware of needs for the people around you, right? The top right, you'll hear in the video in just a minute from Nora, who we actually have her mom at the back here. Leah was our pastor during all of this, and her daughter, her dad works in the healthcare industry and was very aware of the cost of healthcare and having conversations in their family about medical debt. And so many of you might be aware of RIP medical debt, which forgives medical debt for pennies on the dollar. And you'll hear a little bit about from her. She started an Oklahoma campaign because there wasn't one. But in order to do that, you had to set a campaign goal of $5,000. Well, she only had $150, right? So she went ahead and started and invited others to give, and she surpassed her goal, okay? Over $5,000 was given. Her initial $150 and the $5,000 given to the campaign, listen to this, ended up abolishing $764,000 of medical debt. Isn't that amazing? Oh. Abolished to zero medical debt for 488 people in Oklahoma. Just talk about when we say your gift makes a difference, your ideas and your passion make a difference. It does. And they're experiencing that. So I'm going to call up Emmy. We talked a lot about, in the beginning, about them thinking about what are their passions, what are they interested in, and where does that match with a community need, right? When we think about how do we put our passions towards something good in the community. And so Emmy did that.
I loved getting the chance to pick something very important to me for Pay It Forward. I gave my Pay It Forward to a horse ranch that helps kids. We got to see how our interests made an impact in the community. My money was tripled, and for Christmas, a donation was made in my honor. That money was also doubled. I was very happy when I realized I could make a difference.
All right, so, leave that there. So the impact, in the end, there were 23 recipients or organizations that benefited. We encouraged people to multiply their gifts and talked about how we invite others into generosity with us. So in the end, they raised an additional $8,500 between their different projects, resulting in a total of over $13,000 given. The impact of empowered kids, the impact of kids saying, I can make a difference, me, myself, in my own community right here. The impact of seeing needs in the community, just being aware, just taking a moment to think about where is their need, and then an opportunity to learn about those needs and to educate themselves about those needs. The impact of family conversations, hearing from families about the conversations that they're having in the car, around the dinner table, about decisions about what to give to, or ideas that they have, or when they were working on them together, was just very impactful for families. The leadership opportunities that you already heard from Luke's story, the way that it inspired the congregation and continues to was very impactful. And the way that it moved us as it being Matthew, to be Matthew 25, to live that out in tangible ways was quite impactful through the challenge. I'm going to share right now the Pay It Forward video to end, and you can hear and see a few of the other projects.
Take a look around, tell me what you see. In a world full of fear, war and poverty, it's time for us to change into something more.
Hi, I'm Emmy, and my church, First Presbyterian Church, is doing a Pay It Forward challenge. Each kid gets $150 to make a change in the world. And I'm giving my $150 to Turning Point Ranch. I love horses, and I want to help build the indoor arena so kids can ride during it while it's snowing or thunderstorms or even when it's way too hot. So I'm inviting you to help me build the Turning Point Ranch's new indoor arena.
It doesn't take a hero to start the wave of change. All you do is help someone in hopes they'll do the same. Everybody waking up, it's a brand new day. Stand up now and sing this song, tear those walls away.
The number one reason in America that people go bankrupt is because of medical bills. For my Pay It Forward challenge, I donated my money to RIP Medical Debt. RIP Medical Debt helps people that can't pay their medical bills and sometimes lose their house, cars, and can't pay for groceries. On my first day of campaign, my campaign raised $900. Thank you for helping me pay it forward.
I gave my Pay It Forward funds to my school book fair, and I gave it to Nature's Bank. I did it because I wanted kids to get books at the book fair if they didn't have money to. I really wanted to help animals. Nature's Bank saves hurt and wild animals. The money I gave them helps to buy food for the winter months.
Pay it forward. hero to start the wave of change. All you do is help someone in hopes they'll do the same. Everybody waking up, it's a brand new day. Stand up now and sing this song, tear those walls away.
So I hope you can see through that the variety, right? That it wasn't just these massive, big scale things, but things that made a difference in big and small ways, and things that that our kids were passionate about and were interested in. So here's where you can access resources. It's also on the white paper. I don't have the presentation loaded quite yet, but I'll get that loaded and that will be on there. There's also other resources that aren't on the tables there that are included. One thing I just want to say for all of this is one congregation's story, and it won't look the same in any other congregation, right? This was created for a specific context, and we all know that in faith formation, we adapt. So I hope what this did or can do is just to provide a jumping off point for ways that you might adapt or make you think of a different way that that might work in your own congregation. But it's not a cookie cutter approach. It's just one particular way that I hope might inspire you to other possibilities in your own congregations. Yes? Oh. Right. So the question is if we plan to do it in the future. For sure, the Pay It Forward Challenge, we have plans to run that every 3 years. We feel like at that point, you can't do it every year, it loses its power, but 3 years, you're doing it at different ages and you're thinking about different things. I'm not sure on the Seeing Jesus and mission study. I'm sure we have curriculum plans at our church, and we'll kind of see how that continues to fit in, because that continues to be a large part of who we are as a congregation, and I'm sure we'll continue that teaching with our children and youth. Mm-hmm.
Provide a list of like suggested organizations to kind of get them started, or did you sort of leave them to...
Oh, that's a good question. We didn't. We didn't provide a list for the Pay It Forward Challenge of potential organizations or possibilities, other than maybe what happened in the Pay It Forward kickoff, where the speaker provided just some possibilities, right? But we talked about doing that and started gathering them, and then we thought, you know what, that might limit too much. And so we really encourage them to do, once they kind of thought about what they might be interested in or passionate about, to do their own research that way on potential, if they wanted to partner with an organization, to research what other organizations are doing that work. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Oh, yes. Last one.
For the first curriculum you talked about, is transitioning your church part of the curriculum, or did you
Say that again.
transitioning your church to start the curriculum? Is it a part of it?
To become a Matthew 25?
Oh,
Yes.
to be a Matthew 25 church. The curriculum that was $1,000. No, we were already a Matthew 25 church when we started using that curriculum. Mm-hmm. I think that how are we fully implementing Matthew 25 and anti-racism? Is that your question? To embrace that? I don't know, maybe Leah's a better person to answer this, but it's kind of been a part of our church's DNA. It's kind of been we've been talking about difficult things, like we are willing to wrestle with stuff we need to be talking about that I think maybe some other churches are not comfortable talking about. I don't know. We've kind of been having some of those conversations, and it was kind of a no-brainer when Matthew 25 came out to say, well, of course we would be a part of this process. And of course we're going to do anti-racism work. It wasn't ever we need to convince them to do it. They were kind of already there, because I think maybe we'd laid the groundwork of having those conversations, being a part of wrestling with difficult conversations all the way through. that was kind of always a part of the fabric of our church. Yeah. Okay, one last online.
Online, just you mentioned a few things, but anything you do differently?
What would I do differently? Maybe have a better plan from the very beginning, but you never know what God's going to put in front of you, right? I don't know. Again, maybe doing the faith practices at the beginning as we really think about, that's been one of the things we're trying to let them know, that all of this work in justice comes from our faith, right? That we are moved by what God is doing through Scripture and in us, in worship and in study, that moves us out. That it doesn't just end there and we sit there and we think, wow, that was a great study, and go home and live the same way. Like it challenges us to change the way we live, to change the way that we look at the world. And so just continuing to keep that focus. And I think the faith practices are helping us do that, but I wish we would have started with that. Thank you all. I know we're over. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. And email me anytime. If you have questions, you want to bounce things off of me, I'm always open to that.